Ingles.fm Real English Conversations Series 2 Podcast 4 Immigration Inmigración. Este podcast contiene una conversación real y sin guión entre dos hablantes nativos de inglés, Mark y Tom. Oirás primero la conversación y a continuación una clase de inglés con explicaciones en español. Cada podcast viene con un workbook detallado que puedes descargar desde nuestra página web ingles.fm. Incluye una transcripción completa de la conversación, listas de vocabulario, notas culturales y la clase. Recuerda que los miembros de nuestra lista de distribución reciben gratis transcripciones extra de nuestros podcasts, además de muchas otras cosas gratis. Así que no olvides apuntarte al consultar la página. ¡Buena suerte!
Hi, my name's Mark and I'm sitting here with Tom today. Hello, Tom.
Hello.
Right, today we're recording from my flat in Barcelona, relatively near Sants train station. And today we're going to speak about immigration.
Yes, Mark and I are both immigrants and emigrants,
That's right.
as is about 3% of the world's population. And we are also known as expatriates or expats, aren't we?
We are.
So an immigrant, firstly, to define it, is a person who has come to live in a different country in order to live there permanently. And an immigrant is a person who has left a country permanently to go and live in another one.
So Tom and I are emigrants because we've left the UK, and we're immigrants because we've chosen to live in Spain.
Yeah. And according to the United Nations, there are more than 200 million migrants around the world today. So we're not alone leaving our
it's a few of us.
fatherland. Exactly, and there's been a huge increase of 37% in the last 2 decades. So the world's population has become a lot more mobile, I would say. What are some of the areas you think that have the highest levels of immigrants, Mark?
I would say Europe and North America. The most developed regions of the world seem to be, well, obviously are, a lot more attractive, and people from around the world want to live there.
Yeah, Europe has about 70 million and North America about 45 million, but the figures are notoriously inaccurate because of undocumented labour migration, which is a lot of people moving around very quickly and illegally sometimes.
So it's only statistics for people who have, like us, legally registered to live in the new country.
Yeah. And according to a poll conducted by Gallup a few years ago, there are about 700 million adults in the world that would like to migrate. Now, do you have any idea what the top destinations are that they would like to go to?
Probably, again, they'd probably like to go to the most developed countries, so North America, Europe, Australia.
Yeah, exactly. 33% want to go to the USA and Canada, and the rest mainly to Europe and Saudi Arabia and places like that. So let's look now at a little bit of the history of immigration, and push factors and pull factors are what causes people to immigrate or might emigrate.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give us an idea of what some of the push factors might be?
Well, a push factor to get literally to push you from your country to another could be lack of education or work opportunities, repression, fear, religious intolerance.
Higher wage rates, you might get more money in another country, escaping from poverty, or natural disasters as well.
And also just the prospect of having a happier life by whatever means that is for the individual.
Yeah, and avoiding arrest, running away from the law.
It's always useful.
And what are some of the pull factors? I mean, we've just covered some of these actually, but obviously education, the availability of jobs, and this idea that we say the streets are paved with gold. And it's an idea that means that you leave your country to go somewhere
where life will be much better.
Yeah, and a lot more money. Another factor is transport improvements. Can you enlighten us about this, how this might have changed the levels of immigration over the years?
Well, I reckon that due to the developments in transport over the last 150 years, it essentially made migration a lot easier than it was in the past. So to get from Europe to the United States would take weeks, 4 or 5 weeks in the past.
Yep.
And it was very expensive for that reason, so many people couldn't afford to make the journey. But with the advent of steamships and sea transport, it reduced significantly to just over a week, so many more people could afford to make the journey, and that facilitated them going, in this case, to the US, but also with trains, planes, travelling around the world has become easier.
And 19th century USA was, but you've just touched on it, was one of the areas that basically had a lot of migrants. Do we know where they came from?
Mainly from Europe.
And it was to do with the economic expansion of the United States, wasn't it? And
There was a thirst for new labour.
yeah, and I think 150 years ago, 20% of the population in the US was foreign-born, but now it's 10%. So it gives you an idea of what kind of levels these were when America was building up in the 19th century.
Yeah, most of those people have obviously been assimilated in as Americans now, and their children and children's children have been born in the US, so they fall outside the earlier category.
Australia. We both emigrated to Australia for a period. It wasn't permanently, so maybe we're not technically immigrants. But can you tell us a bit about the history of Australian immigration, because that's quite famous amongst the British?
Well, it started as a penal colony where the UK would expel thousands of convicts, convicted criminals, to places beyond the seas, it was called, to the other side of the world. And with them were prison guards and penal officials who brought their families. Slowly, as the colony became self-sustaining, the more entrepreneurial people from Britain decided that they could make a living, a better living for themselves, mainly in agriculture in Australia. So many independent people chose to go and strike out alone and see if they could make their fortune in Australia.
So it's full of prisoners, Australia.
That's how it originated, and they don't like to be reminded of the penal history.
No, they call us POMs and we call them convicts. Anyway, moving
Still.
on to statistics and an overview of the immigrant situation in the UK and Spain. Now, Spain is one of the top desired destinations in the world. There's 35 million people that they estimate would move to Spain if all travel restrictions were lifted, and 45 million would move to the UK or France. So obviously they're some of the top desired destinations in the world. Now, where do you think the main immigrants come to Spain from at the moment?
I would say, due to geographical reasons, it would probably be North Africa, and also from the colonial period, South and Latin America.
Yeah, I think it's Romania is the main destination actually in Spain, the main place that people come from, and Morocco, Ecuador, UK, and Colombia. So we're one of those statistics.
Yeah, very popular destination for Brits.
Exactly. And in recent years there's been a growing illegal immigration from West Africa, and they come via the Canary Islands. And a statistic I've got here is from 2006, 24,000 people made the boat crossing from West Africa to the Canary Islands, and 3,000 died. So that's between 10-15% of people died trying to get to the Canary Islands, where they're effectively within Spanish territorial boundaries.
Yeah, it's a very dangerous crossing, and also they make a crossing from North Africa to southern Spain, which is a very short journey, but unfortunately they normally come on small rafts across one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world, in the Straits of Gibraltar. So there are also many would-be immigrants wash up on Spanish beaches in the south.
Yeah, it's a very sad fact that these boats come over from Africa, actually. In 2006, Spain asked for help from the EU because of its immigration problem, and the German foreign minister famously replied, "Madrid must stop asking for the money of others," because he said that the cause for the huge increase in immigration in Spain was Spain's decision to grant an amnesty to the 500,000 undocumented foreigners here in 2005, and this effectively, as we say, opened the floodgates to lots more immigrants. Would you agree with that?
I think so, but you can understand why Spain did what they did in order to make these people who were here and were working here, make them legal. But at the same time, people wanting to come to Spain would probably imagine that if they've done it once, they'll do it again. So if you come here illegally, after a period of time, then they'll probably have a second amnesty, and they will then become incorporated as legal.
Yeah.
So you can see the logic behind it, but I don't think there's going to be a second amnesty anytime soon.
Yeah, well, since 2000, Spain has actually absorbed more than 3 million immigrants, so there's been a huge increase in the last decade or so in Spain, and
About 10% population increase, isn't it?
yeah, I think, well, there's 4.5 million immigrants, so that is 10% of the population, pretty much. So you can imagine that it's had an impact on the society here, which we'll talk a bit more about later. Talking about the UK immigrants in Spain, there's about, well, it's the top destination for immigration for Brits, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
And how many do you think there are? How many of us do you think there are here?
I think there's probably, I read a statistic that they say there's around 1 million Brits living in Spain, but again, that's documented. So there are many here seasonal workers or working without legal papers, because as EU citizens we have a lot more freedom of movement within the European Union.
Yeah, Spain's also absorbing all our old people, isn't it, with the recent phenomenon of retirement migration. So
Yeah.
what does that consist of?
Well, there are whole towns and villages that are basically owned, well, the houses in these villages are all owned by British pensioners. Many of them have retired in the UK, a few years ago sold their houses for very good prices in England, bought much cheaper houses in Spain so they can live out their retirement years in the sun and still have quite a tidy packet in the bank.
And die in the sun.
Maybe.
Anyway, in the UK, where are the main countries that immigrants come from?
Similar to the situation in Spain, I guess it's from the ex-colonies. I know that from the Indian subcontinent and Africa predominantly make up the majority of the immigrants in the UK.
Yeah, and Pakistan, but the top place is actually Republic of Ireland, though some people might not count that as proper immigration, but anyway, that's a contentious subject as well. So most of the immigrants come from our former colonies, and an interesting fact, at the British Empire's peak, more than a third of the world's population lived under British rule, which is quite incredible. And so historically, when the British government opened up the borders to the Commonwealth, to the colonial countries in 1948 at the end of World War II, they said anyone can come to the country to help rebuild the country after the war. And this enabled 800 million people, well, it gave them permission to come to the UK. So we had a hell of a lot of immigration, didn't we, after the war?
And many of those came from the independence of India and the partition to create Pakistan. There was enormous religious violence because Pakistan wanted to be an Islamic state against India's predominantly Hindu, so inter-religious rivalry, and lots of people were killed. I don't know the figure, but hundreds of thousands, maybe more, and that caused the majority of the educated classes to take up the offer of emigration and come to the UK, mainly to be doctors, lawyers, professionals.
And is this why our national dish is now chicken tikka masala?
Probably, because that's not actually an Indian dish. It was invented by Indian immigrants in England.
We'll maybe talk about curries another day. So, another recent phenomenon are all the people coming from Eastern Europe to England. There's been 1.5 million workers have migrated in the last 5 years or so from the new EU member states to the UK. And what's one of the main places they come from?
Poland.
Yes, and we were talking about this before we started recording, and there are about 500,000 Polish people that come to and from the UK, and they do a lot of the jobs that, well, a lot of the more, what are they called?
Manual jobs?
Manual jobs like building and plumbing and cleaning and decorating and things like that, but they have a very good reputation, don't they?
They do. I mean, we know many people who have contracted Polish builders. They are, unlike the reputation of English builders, they're very punctual, very efficient, and they cost quite a bit less than an English builder.
Anyway, what are some of the more negative attitudes towards immigration in the UK and Spain?
Well, generally there's a nationalistic idea that immigrants are taking our jobs, in inverted commas, but the reality is often the case that the host population, or the members of the host population, often don't want to do these manual jobs. For example, driving buses, working in construction, cleaning, and immigrants are willing to do these jobs, and the jobs that need to be done. So some of these negative negative feelings are not realistic.
Yeah, the British National Party is the famous one in England, isn't it? And it's run by a total idiot called Nick Griffin. And he basically states, well, the British National Party, the BNP, states that immigration threatens national identity, and they're trying to return Britain to a state it was before 1948, when the white ethnicity was the main predominant ethnicity, I guess, in England.
I think that's irrational, because the world has changed so much in the last 60, 70 years. You can't turn the clock back.
No, of course not. And he's generally viewed with ridicule by the other political parties. But, worryingly, in the last general election, this year, the BNP received 1.9% of the vote, whereas 5 years ago it was 0.7%. So they've had nearly a threefold increase in their voter base in 5 years. So obviously people are starting to, their policies are starting to appeal to people a bit more. So.
I think that's similar in Spain, because I believe in a similar poll in Spain, I think the top answer for what worries the population most, more than terrorism, more than unemployment, was immigration, because a massive immigration has happened in Spain in a relatively short period of time. So whereas in the UK it's been ongoing for 50, 60, 70 years, people are used to it. But in Spain, a lot has happened in a very short period, and it seems quite overwhelming to some people.
Yeah, and they might even make links, subconsciously or otherwise, between immigration and terrorism and things like that. Anyway, finally, before we finish, what are some of the main problems that immigrants face?
Well, as we discovered to a degree, but not half as bad as most people, coming to a new country, learning a new language, adapting to the new culture, the new ways that things are done, going through various processes to register yourself to work, and to get to a point where you're accepted by your new host country, not be viewed as foreigners.
Yes, the language, the difference in culture. I mean, it's easy if you're moving between European countries to a certain extent, but you know, when I was in Thailand, there was a lot that I had to get used to, and it can be difficult to find work to do basic things like order food. You know, when I first arrived, I couldn't talk to anyone, so I ended up eating rice every day, you know. But yeah, there were lots of very difficult problems that people face, including things like no legal status with some immigrants. You know, they might not be able to move around freely. They might be confined to certain areas, and they can experience racism and exclusionary behaviour in general towards them and their family.
But it goes both ways, because some immigrants choose not to integrate in the new society, live in ghettos, don't learn the language, and are very isolated, and that way they make themselves appear to be more different than maybe they are. So there's two sides of the same coin, really, but integration both ways and acceptance in new societies is probably the best way to deal with it. Make an effort to integrate and people will welcome you, so it works both ways.
Exactly. And on a final note, we should think ourselves lucky that we don't live in North Korea, Burma or Somalia, because it's illegal to emigrate there.
And I don't think many people would like to immigrate to those countries either.
No. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Hola, me llamo Rose. Y en la clase de hoy te vamos a enseñar algunas palabras muy habituales para describir, sobre todo de manera negativa, sentimientos y emociones. Hoy hemos seleccionado algunas palabras y expresiones de un nivel algo más avanzado de lo habitual, y si las aprendes y las usas, te garantizamos que sonarás tan natural como un hablante nativo. Para empezar, ¿te acuerdas de la palabra que quiere decir enfadado en inglés? Se trata de angry. Ahora vamos a enseñarte dos adjetivos más de uso muy común, que son sinónimos de angry. El primero es annoyed. Ahora vas a escuchar una frase de ejemplo con la palabra en contexto. Luego Tom la pronunciará y hará una pausa para que practiques repitiéndola.
I was really annoyed last night when my bus was late. Annoyed. Annoyed.
Otro adjetivo muy útil que también significa angry es irritated.
I get really irritated by all the noise in my street on Saturday nights. Irritated. Irritated.
Por último, en inglés británico, la expresión coloquial más habitual para decir angry y que oirás todo el tiempo es pissed off. ¡Cuidado! Los norteamericanos dicen solo pissed para decir angry, pero en el inglés británico, pissed quiere decir borracho.
I'm totally pissed off with the weather at the moment. Pissed off. Pissed off.
Y ahora, ¿sabes cómo se dice preocupado en inglés? La palabra que casi todo el mundo conoce es worried. Sin embargo, hay otras dos expresiones muy utilizadas como sinónimo de worried, que son anxious y apprehensive. Os dejo con Tom.
I'm feeling really anxious about my exam tomorrow. Anxious. Anxious. My sister is very apprehensive about driving to Spain next week. Apprehensive. Apprehensive.
Y ahora vamos a por sentimientos más positivos. Todo el mundo sabe que la palabra en inglés que significa feliz es happy. Sin embargo, la próxima vez que alguien te pregunte cómo te hace sentir algo y quieras responder very happy, ¿por qué no usar uno de estos?
I'm delighted that I got my new job. Delighted. Delighted. I'm over the moon that my sister's coming to stay with me in Barcelona. Over the moon. Over the moon.
Pongamos que si la hermana de Tom no pudo llegar a Barcelona porque le cancelaron el vuelo, y esto le pasó el año pasado con la compañía EasyJet, Tom diría que se sintió let down, que significa decepcionado.
When my sister didn't arrive in Barcelona, I felt so let down I wanted to cry. Let down. Let down.
Por último, la expresión to be fed up with significa estar harto de. Por ejemplo,
I'm so fed up with EasyJet, their flights are always cancelled. Or, I'm so fed up with England, I'm moving to Spain. To be fed up with. To be fed up with.
gracias por escuchar nuestra clase sobre sentimientos y emociones. Si tienes alguna pregunta, no dudes en mandárnosla en la casilla de comentarios que hay para este podcast en nuestra web. ¡Chao!
Gracias por acompañarnos con este podcast de Ingles.fm. Recuerda que el workbook contiene una transcripción completa de la conversación, listas de vocabulario, notas culturales y la clase. Lo puedes descargar de forma instantánea desde Ingles.fm. Nos vemos.